Although low and slow barbecue began in the USA, it has gained popularity worldwide. And among those worldwide fanatics is Dave, who lives in the UK and has a barbecue business and YouTube channel called Wilson's Barbecue. So I'm gonna follow his guide to see how it compares with Southern style barbecue and also to see if his techniques are truly magical. Get it, like Harry Potter, cause he's English. Magical. This brisket is just under 9 pounds and it is the tiniest brisket I have ever seen from Costco. I mean, it's so tiny, it actually got crumpled from the vacuum seal. So Dave has a separate video where he details how he likes to trim brisket, but honestly, after reviewing a ton of different trimming techniques this last summer, I can honestly say that most people's trimming techniques are about 90% the same across the board. So I will just go over the interesting parts of his technique, and if you want to see the full breadth of how he trims brisket, then make sure to watch this video, and I'll have that linked in the description below. So the first cool tip is that Dave starts trimming on the fat cap side of the brisket. Now this is brilliant because the fat cap side is where most of the work needs to be done, and it's going to be a lot easier to trim a brisket when it's cold versus when it's been sitting out for a while. And honestly, since watching his video, now every time I trim brisket, I always do fat side first. So the next thing that Dave does is that he cuts the mohawk completely off of the brisket. So most pitmasters actually do this, which makes sense because you do not want any hanging parts in your cooker, especially if you're cooking multiple briskets, because anything that's hanging is going to burn. But I gotta say that I personally like to keep the mohawk on because the burnt ends from this piece are absolutely insane if you take care of it. So let's go over to the lean side. So a lot of people like to just shave down the decal fat here, but Dave actually removes it completely off. And the more briskets I cook, the more I'm becoming a fan of this method because you get a much better bark on both sides of your burnt ends. Okay, the trim is done, and this is a pretty brisket if I do say so myself. So Dave actually does not use any binder, he just goes straight for the seasoning, and because he is a man of culture, like myself, he seasons his briskets Derby barbecue style. So that's pepper, salt, and then Lawry's in that order. So I'm actually gonna stick this brisket in the fridge because Dave likes to season his briskets the day before because it helps to wick away moisture from the brisket, which will help develop a bark early on in the cook, and then you get that nice, beautiful black bark at the end. Now, I've previously done this method before, but it was mainly just to break up the work between 2 days. So I'll be sure to pay attention this time to see if there's a tangible difference in the bark once this is done. And with that said, I will catch you guys tomorrow. So how did an Englishman get into Texas-style barbecue? Well, that was the first question I asked Dave on Instagram. Now, I was hoping that Dave would be able to record a response for this video, but because of the craziness of the holidays, he just didn't have time. So instead, I asked my friend Morgan Freeman to read it.
Dave had always been into cooking since he was a young man, which in turn became a love for all types of different foods, including barbecue. So in 2014, Dave decided to give cooking barbecue a try himself. He bought an offset for 130 quid in an attempt to emulate the cool-looking smoke he saw on the barbecue with Franklin series. In 2019, he traveled to Texas and had his first bite of real Tex brisket. That sent him on a course of trying to learn as much about Tex-style barbecue as he possibly could. Subscribe to Ant's Barbecue Cookout and smash the like button for the YouTube algorithm.
Thanks, Morgan. So although Dave has adopted a lot of his techniques from the Texas style, he still has a few really interesting techniques up his sleeve. So most pitmasters I know of smoke their briskets on an offset at 275 degrees Fahrenheit the whole way through. But this is not the case for Wilson's Barbecue. So for the first 3 hours, he cooks the brisket at 250 degrees Fahrenheit, 260 degrees Fahrenheit the next 3 hours, and finally 275 for the last 3. And at around the 5-hour mark, he uses a soy sauce and water spritz to give the brisket a darker bark and also to prevent the ends from burning. The very first Wilson's Barbecue video I watched is when he showed a behind-the-scenes look at his catering business. I think he called it like a collection or something, but I think that's just fancy Englishman talk for catering. It's kind of like how in the States we say popsicles, but they say cold on the cob. But anyways, in his catering video, he cooked a ton of food and it all looked super tasty, so that's when I knew he was legit. Also, very recently, he took a trip from the UK all the way to Texas to work for Leroy & Lewis for free, just to learn from the best. So I know his barbecue has leveled up since this trip, and I cannot wait to see the next video on his YouTube channel. And if you want to keep up with Dave and his barbecue content, I will have a link to his channel, Wilson's Barbecue, in the description below. So now that the bark has set, the fat is nice, rendered, and soft on top, we are now ready to wrap this brisket in butcher's paper. And I was pretty surprised that Dave does not use beef tallow during this step. Beef tallow covers a lot of barbecue brisket sins, so it's kind of cool to see that he doesn't use that crutch. So he finishes his wrapped briskets at 300 degrees Fahrenheit, which is hot, meaning it's going to finish these briskets really quick. But it's totally fine because he uses an extended rest time. So Wilson's Barbecue is a firm believer in a long rest time, and from the videos that I've seen from Chet's Barbecue, Dave, and also Mad Scientist Barbecue, I know that a long rest time makes a huge impact in the end product. Now, I don't usually do an overnight rest because whenever I shoot YouTube videos, I like to finish it in one single day. So I am excited to see the effects of a long rested brisket in person. So because Dave has his own barbecue business, he has warming ovens that keeps his briskets at about 145 to 150 degrees Fahrenheit. But unfortunately, I don't have a warming oven. Now, there are a ton of different ways that you can hold and rest brisket, but I wanted to make sure that I stayed true to Wilson's technique so that this can be a true British brisket. So I messaged him and he suggested that I put it in the oven at the lowest temperature setting, which for me is 170 degrees Fahrenheit. So I'm just gonna let this brisket rest in a pan until it hits about 170, and then I'm gonna stick it in the oven overnight. So confession time. I got a little carried away editing thumbnails and I completely lost track of the brisket. Because the brisket is so small, when I went to wrap it, it was pretty much already close to 200 degrees. So I already know that I overcooked this brisket and I am terrified that I dried out that flat. So if the flat is a little burnt or dry, that has nothing to do with Dave's technique. That's totally on me. But we'll just have to see in the morning when we cut into this thing. So while watching Dave's guide, I noticed that he does a few unconventional things. So I messaged him and asked him if his technique was specific to the beef and spices available to him in the UK. So he explained that the beef in the UK is a lot leaner than what's available in the States because it's grass-fed versus grain-fed. However, in the video that I'm following, he used USDA briskets. So theoretically, this brisket should be just as good, if not close, to the brisket that he had. But again, I'm a little afraid that I burnt the bottom and dried out the flat a little bit, but I'm hoping that long rest time kind of softened up that bark and we'll end up with a really nice brisket. So let's see how I did. So I am blown away at just how incredibly dark this bark is. I've cooked dozens of briskets in my backyard and I have never even had a brisket as close to the darkness that I have in this one right here. And that just goes to show how much the technique matters. Seasoning it overnight, soy sauce spritz, that multi-stage cooking to get a bunch of smoke into this, like, this is crazy. But even before I open it, I'm feeling the bottom and it is really tight, really like crunchy. So again, that was my mistake. I wrapped this way too late. So that has nothing to do with Dave's technique. That is totally on me. But I think we'll still be able to get some good bites out of the burnt ends and be able to evaluate this brisket well. All right. Yep, I dried the heck out of that. But yeah, these flat slices are pretty dry. So not cooked perfectly, but this still looks absolutely amazing. Look at that fat, how rendered it is on the top. And again, I pulled this brisket at about 215. I really expected it to be overly tender like this, but still, I mean, this looks really good. I want to absolutely bite into this. These burnt ends. Such a dark bark. Look at how yellow that fat is on the top. That looks like candy, dude. I cannot wait to try this bite. And I'm so glad I gave this a try because I learned so many new tricks to get a really dark bark on a brisket. So thanks, Dave, for everything that you're doing on the Wilson's Barbecue channel, for teaching everybody and just sharing your knowledge. But anyways, enough stalling. Let's go ahead and give this thing a try. So let me grab a piece of that burnt end. Yeah, you can just see that candied fat on top. All right, cheers. That is absolutely wonderful. Oh no. British! But no joke, that candied fat that you saw on top, that decal fat, oh my goodness. As soon as my teeth bit into it, just exploded with flavor. Yeah, let me grab a piece of this flat. I gotta try this a little bit more. Okay, look, I messed up big time on this brisket, but it is so tender. Like, I'm like trying to visualize. Imagine if I did this correctly. This would have been phenomenal. But I hope you learned something new and had as much fun as I did watching this. And if you did enjoy this, then you should watch my offset pork butt experiment video, which is on your screen right now.